your background as a judge. You're someone who's known very well in the Macomb County area because of your work as a judge. But obviously, John James has a significant amount of name recognition. 80% is the last polling I saw, because of the fact that he's run now 2 statewide races. So how do you deal with that uphill battle? And what do you think about your experience makes you someone who can serve the 10th Congressional District?
I mean, ultimately, these elections come down to issues more than name recognition. And people are looking for answers to things like inflation, the issue of choice. A particular spin in this race is that Mr. James does not live in the district. I do. And so you're looking at a person who would have to move in if he won the election. He says that he will move in if he wins, but that's a promise for the future. But right now, representation, I think, is a main issue in this. Is it right for a person to be in the House of Representatives saying that he wants to represent a community that he doesn't even live in? In addition to that, I'm pro-choice. Mr. James is not, and I think that's a huge difference and a motivating factor for voters. I mean, your individual liberty is on the line. Other issues will come and go. But the ability to know that when you go to your physician, it's a private matter that the government doesn't have any business poking its nose into, I think that will drive people also. And lastly, in terms of making up the difference in recognition of the names, is the issue of inflation and the economy. Mr. James is wedded to the old fossil fuel economy, basically preferring to think of oil and gas as the way to heat our homes, drive our cars. As long as we do that, we're giving OPEC and Russia and Iran the upper hand because they can, as they're doing now, they can withhold billions of barrels of oil off the market. It can increase the cost of gasoline and oil. It increases all of our prices. And even if we drill more, they would simply produce less. And so they can always inflate the price of oil. And as shown by the last quarter, oil companies had a record $51 billion in profits, 235% up over the previous time period. Excuse me. And I mean, it just makes me angry that we allow the oil companies to get away with gouging us. And it not only makes us angry, it makes us poorer because the price of gasoline and oil leads to other inflation. Everything that you buy at the supermarket is delivered by a truck somewhere. And so as the prices go up for oil and gas, and as the profits go up for the oil firms, we pay more in everything. Democrats want to control the oil prices. Republicans get the majority of their campaign contribution from oil companies. I think it's pretty clear who has the better way to fight inflation.
Well, to be clear and to be fair, both Republicans and Democrats are subject to the oil lobby, and there are plenty of Democrats who have gotten big money from big oil. But when you talk about inflation, which is something that 46% of Americans, 46% of Michiganders specifically, based on some recent CNN polling, believe is top of mind. Inflation in the economy is right there at the top for many people here in Michigan, more so than abortion, which over the summer obviously made headlines because of the Dobbs decision and the vacating of Roe versus Wade. But in this present circumstance, the thing that Michiganders are most concerned with is the economy and inflation. As a Democrat, how can you justify, say, the Inflation Reduction Act, the American Rescue Plan, and the tremendous amount of spending, the CHIPS Act, for example, which economists say is certainly not solely responsible for inflation, but it did help in the 4-decade highs we're seeing. And even though Fed Chair Jerome Powell has continued to raise rates and is expected to do so again today, it's very likely, and I should say expected to do so Wednesday for viewers who may watch this at a different time. It's a reality that we're still seeing this out of control inflation. And economists, both liberal and conservative, have to concede that the tremendous amount of spending in this short period of time has contributed. So would you have done things differently? Would you, for example, have voted for the Inflation Reduction Act, even though a study out of the University of Pennsylvania found that it would have a negligible effect, equal to zero?
Well, wait a minute. I would have, first of all, I'm a Democrat that has not and will not accept money from oil companies at all at any time, because again, no matter what the oil companies try to spin it and what the spin doctors try to say, in this cycle, the root cause of inflation is the increased cost of oil and gas. The Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, all of those things were just passed. The spending hasn't even started. It cannot be the cause of inflation in this cycle. And as a matter of fact, inflation is a worldwide phenomenon outside of the United States. Other countries, Turkey has 88% inflation. The United Kingdom is 10%. The United States is around 8%. We're down the lower end of the tier. France, Netherlands, all the European countries have big inflation. And so to try to say that this is a Biden administration problem is just wrong-headed. It's wrong. It's factually wrong. It's a worldwide phenomenon. And what are the things that are driving it? The war in Ukraine is causing problems in prices of grain, and Russia and OPEC and Iran holding oil off the market is what is driving prices up. Now, the study that you said, that the Inflation Reduction Act will have a negligible effect on inflation. Yeah, okay, but negligible means some, and it will have a key effect in terms of
0.02%. That's
yeah, okay. But remember, if you are at the bottom of the economic spectrum and you're spending things for food, for drugs, the Inflation Reduction Act did allow Medicare to negotiate with the drug companies to drive the pharmaceutical prices down. So in terms of things that hit ordinary families, that is something that is big. The cost of insulin is something that is big. But again, getting back to what I said at the start, we and the middle class and just ordinary folks, we feel inflation in terms of the cost of prices at the store. And no matter what the economists that are quoted by the oil companies say, the reason why those prices are going up is because the cost of delivery is going up. And there's no honest way to look at this and say that we can ever get control of inflation unless we get control of the price of oil and gas. And the only way to do that long term is to have the United States tell the OPEC countries that we are going to the clean, new green energy sources, wind, solar, tidal, the heat from the earth. All of these will produce a far more efficient way of heating, driving automobiles. And when OPEC knows this, when they know that that threat is real, that we can go to these alternate means of energy, they will be forced by market forces to stop gouging us.
So let's get further into that. And I want to talk about some legislation that Senator Blumenthal introduced that would essentially stop arms sales to the Saudis for a year, which has not moved. And it has a companion bill in the House as well. So theoretically, if you were to be elected and it were still sitting around, some iteration of that could be voted on. But before we get to that, the American Rescue Plan, a lot of those dollars, as we know, I know you're a consumer of news, of local news, you see all the time how that money's being used. And economists, again, to clarify, both liberal and conservative have said the American Rescue Plan for sure that nearly $2 trillion in spending did impact inflation to some degree. Now, economists disagree about to what extent it impacted inflation, but the consensus is clear that that massive amount of spending did impact the inflation numbers we're seeing now. So I'm asking you if it's appropriate, and looking down the road, spending, obviously, modern monetary policy, we know, is problematic. This idea that we can just print money and we won't see an inflationary response, which we're living through now. So even if we're not seeing the effect, say, of the Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS Act, infrastructure bill spending today, it's very likely that that could be the situation in the future. But on the American Rescue Plan, is it something you think should have been as massive as it was? Okay, was that infusion of cash necessary?
No, I can answer that one. I mean, the answer is no. I mean, look at I'm a liberal on a lot of social issues, the choice issue, the leading one, but I tend to be an economic conservative on other issues. And so your basic premise is right, that unfettered government spending does cause a problem. It does lead to inflation because then you have too many dollars chasing too few goods and services. The Inflation Reduction Act that the Democrats passed is at least neutral, or maybe, a bit favorable to the consumer, in that it capped some prices. But the good thing about the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act is that if you are spending money to produce products, to like bring chips home and have them produced here, the more you produce products, the more control you have over inflation. It's when you are throwing money out there and you're not leading to increased production that you have an increase in inflation. And so, yes, in general, in the Congress, I would be a voice of taking a moderate, more conservative approach on government spending, because all my life I've been an economic conservative. However, notwithstanding that that's a general rule, this cycle, there's a lot of obfuscation and untruths that are being peddled by trying to say that there's something about the Democratic policies that have caused inflation because those bills haven't started spending enough. Secondly, world inflation is a worldwide problem, with other countries experiencing much more inflation than we are. And lastly, it's just a fundamental truth, might be inconvenient, people might not want to look at it, but it is the cost of energy. It is OPEC, Russia, and Iran raising oil prices, holding oil off the market. That is the root cause of inflation in this cycle. And we need somebody like me, maybe, I don't know what other Democrats might think, but I'm going to Washington to try to stop the OPEC countries and Russia and Iran from having their way in foreign policy and in economic policy as well.
Yeah, and on that front, let's transition to Saudi Arabia and OPEC Plus deciding to slash 2 million barrels of oil production per day, which is obviously will affect gas prices for some states more than others. What is the appropriate response with the Saudis? Do you favor Senator Blumenthal's plan to stop arms sales for a year? Is that the appropriate thing to do here? What do you think our response should be? And what about what we can do here domestically? Should the Biden administration be much more aggressive, and Democrats wholly on allowing for new leases here in America to drill additional oil and beefing up our production? Because energy independence in renewables is still 5-10 years away. Predominantly, we're using fossil fuels to power our cars, et cetera. So should we be drilling more here in the United States? A lot of Republicans feel that we should. A lot of Americans feel that we should. What say you?
I do too. Yeah, I mean, look at, but it's a short-term solution, because long-term, you have to move ourselves to a renewable energy economy. And I don't think it's necessarily 5 years away. If we had people manufacturing the fast charging stations, so that everywhere where there's a rest stop on the interstate, you have a charging station. Everywhere on the U.S. highway system, every 50 miles or so, you had a charging station. People would lose the distance anxiety that keeps them from buying EV vehicles right now. The sale of EV vehicles would go up. As a result of that, more people would be employed, the economy would be better. But again, the factories that would build the charging stations, those would be employing new people. And so as a result of that, the economy would be in better shape as well.
And let me ask you just directly, in terms of boosting our domestic oil production, what should happen today?
We should boost our domestic oil production, but look at that is a false solution. I mean, it helps in a very, very short run, because OPEC has said that if we boost our production, they will cut theirs. I mean, they have the monopoly worldwide. You cannot balance it out. You can never produce enough at home to offset what they're doing to us internationally. You got to basically say, we're done. We're done with oil and gas. I mean, look, there's always going to be some need for some oil, some gas, our domestic production should be enough. And I believe that we should increase production. But if you're looking for that as a solution, you're looking up the wrong alley. I mean, that is not going to work because OPEC will simply reduce the amount that they put on the market. Prices will continue to be up. Inflation will continue. So if there are some economists who think like that, they are simply dead wrong, wrong-headed. They don't know what they're talking about. The long range. Yep. Okay. The long range.
Oh, go ahead.
Because this is the answer. We've been brainwashed into thinking that it's not possible, but it is possible. If we increase our reliance on renewables, if we have more electric vehicles, if we produce heat pumps to cut down on the consumption of oil and gas, we can sell them here, but we can also sell them to Europe. Europe would love to have these things. We can have a full employment, booming economy at the same time that we can cut our dependence on oil and gas. When that happens, we drive a stake through the heart of inflation because the main driver of inflation is then dead.
Today, because again, the renewable future is one that is 5 years away. We're looking at in Europe because of the war in Ukraine, an energy crisis. As I mentioned, OPEC Plus has said it's going to slash 2 million barrels of oil a day in production. Should we take a harder stance today, right now, to say, no, for a year, we're not selling any arms, or for an extended period of time, longer than that, to the Saudis today? And also take a look at our energy policy and our relationship with China, because China is such a huge consumer of Russian oil as well. So what can we do today to pressure OPEC Plus to continue with its production supply lines?
Exactly what you said, what Blumenthal said. Yes, I mean, I was so involved in trying to get to the root cause of inflation that perhaps I missed your question before. Yeah, we have to stand up to I'm done with the Saudis. I think that they're a government that uses illegal means, that suppresses women, that engages in murder. I am done with doing anything to help the Saudis. And I would just stand up to them, not only for the sake of the oil prices, but just say, we don't want to deal with people like you who use murder and intimidation, who treat the population inside your country the way you do. I want them to return to what they should be, basically a country that can have their own oil reserves, they can run their own business, but I don't want them to be controlling the world market, as I don't want Iran and Russia as well. And so, yes, I believe that we cut off aid to the Saudis. If that drives them to the Russians, too bad. I'm tired of being blackmailed by the Middle Eastern oil politics.
I want to get to two more things since we're running out of time here. The first is I want to ask you about abortion and the two pieces of legislation that passed out of the House, which came from Democrats, essentially expanding access, which obviously they had no chance in the Senate, and probably after the midterms will be completely dead in the water. But an effort to essentially grant access on a national level to abortion. Again, the political realities of this are very tenuous in the current political climate, but is that something you support? Do you go as far as Prop 3? Do you think that every abortion attempt at providing abortion access should always include parental consent?
Okay, well, first of all, I do support Prop 3. And there's a lot of misinformation about Proposition 3. Proposition 3 merely reinstates the rights that we had under Roe versus Wade. By its language, it would adopt the language of the controlling case law. And so it is just a continuation in Michigan of what was for all of us our rights over 50 years. I would vote in favor of the bills in Congress to try to reinstate Roe versus Wade, but I guess you're right on the political reality. The chance of that passing is pretty slim. And so while I would be a vote for it, I realize that the long-term solution has to be for states like Michigan and other states to modify their own constitutions in the state so that it's not possible for the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn the Constitution of Michigan, so that we will be an island of sanity and healthcare. And so, yes, I'm very much in favor of Proposition 3, and my opponent clearly is not. I think that that's a big line of demarcation.
And on a national level, if you had the opportunity to vote in the affirmative on the legislation that currently passed out of the House, you would vote in the affirmative. So I understand your answer there.
Oh,
Is
yes,
that correct?
yes.
And secondly, what sort of restrictions, if any, should there be on access to abortion? For you, what is the line?
Well, I think that viability of the fetus is the line, as it was under Roe versus Wade, with the exception that if the mother's health is endangered, not necessarily her life, but if her health is endangered, mental health or physical health, that there should be an exception to allow even for late-term abortions, but those would be very rare. And I mean, I think, Bill Clinton years ago summed up the correct position on abortion. It should be safe, legal, private, and rare. And so I would basically reinstate the rights that we had under Roe versus Wade, which meant that late-term abortions can be regulated and are regulated. With the exception that if you have a person who's about to suffer a serious medical consequence or die, that you can have an intervention. I think that only makes good sense.
Safe, legal, and rare is something Republicans have pointed to and pro-life advocates as a standard in total that's been abandoned by those who would put themselves in the pro-choice camp. And there are concerns among, again, many Americans who think there should be some access to abortion, but worry about late-term abortions, that if the health of the mother is an exception, then anyone, even at the end of her pregnancy, could say, well, it's a mental health issue, and so therefore I can't continue with this pregnancy. How would you support that kind of stipulation and yet ensure that women aren't just using it for late-term abortions?
By the way, no matter what the Republicans say, I still think that the right way to think about abortion is it should be safe, it should be legal, it should be private, and hopefully it should be rare. And that up to the point of viability, I think that there's no business that the state has interfering at all. After a pregnancy has gone to the point where the fetus could live outside of the womb, then we do have other considerations in effect. But I still think that if the mother's health is threatened, mental health or physical health or her life, that abortion should be available. Now, the question then becomes, who decides that? I'm telling you, and if they think that this opens up the door too wide, it's too bad. The only way to make this decision is between a woman and her physician. I don't want a county prosecutor. I don't want 83 different opinions as to whether or not this mental health condition or this physical condition or this a 35% chance of dying is enough to allow for an abortion in some counties, but it's going to take 90% in others. That is too subjective. That is a crazy way to try to live. We're going to have to trust women. We're going to have to trust physicians. And if the other side is saying, well, this opens up the door too much, that's unfortunate. But to try to do it any other way closes the door too solidly. People will end up dying as a result of having a condition that was maybe only 35% life-threatening go to 100% in a short time because the county prosecutor was too slow in making his or her decision known as to whether or not the abortion should be allowed. We do not want politicians, detectives, prosecutors, or judges to be making this decision in these life-threatening decisions.
All right, my final question for you is something that has been used in ads against you, and this is our Fox network actually reporting on this as well. That your former law firm claimed on the website that authorities, quote, led and manipulate children in sex abuse cases to get incriminating statements. And I want to understand if you are soft on people who sexually abuse children.
Yeah. Look, I had one case in which there was a person charged with sexual abuse as a defense attorney. I directed 1,200 cases as the county prosecutor over 20 years. As a judge, I sent people away for long prison terms who abuse children. I am not at all in the middle on this. I am strongly, strongly in favor of protecting children and victims of crime. There was, look at the law firm had something on its website, but again, the purpose of the advertising was to say, if you are innocent, if you are being wrongfully accused, there was a study that was done in those years which showed how wrongful convictions come about. And I think that the website was quoting that. I didn't write the website. I didn't even know it existed, but obviously it's out there, so I can't walk away from it. But again, when you have a website advertising, you're reaching out for people who are innocent, who have been wrongfully charged, and who want to know how can they get themselves out of this nightmare. That's what the website was talking about. But certainly as a prosecutor and as a judge, I was one and legendary in terms of my toughness, in terms of going after anybody who would victimize children or women. And also, in addition to that, I created special programs for the care of the victims of criminal sexual conduct, both children and women. The Sexual Assault Nurse Examiners Program, which allowed for a separate examining room for victims of rape so that they wouldn't have to go into crowded emergency rooms. The Care House, the Advocacy Center for Child Victims of Criminal Sexual Conduct. This is what's so crazy about this campaign is that they take one case and try to turn truth on its head by taking a career of protecting women and children and the victims of rape and incest and trying to say that I don't have the dedication that all through my professional life I clearly showed.
And so I just want to be 100% crystal clear. Do you believe that the authorities quote, lead and manipulate children to make incriminating statements that might reflect little other than the child's willingness to please an important adult?
No, as a general rule, no. But back in whatever period that was, because I asked one of my partners from the time, I said, how did that even get on the website? He said, there was a study which showed that without organizations like the Care House, which I helped to found in Macomb County, that there are sometimes, it did happen, where children were led down the garden path, and that there have been, it's a fact of life. There are people who have been wrongfully convicted of all sorts of crimes. When that happens, you got to find out what was the cause. Sometimes, in some instances, rarely, but it did happen, that children were unfairly led.
So you do believe it's appropriate to be tough on those who abuse children sexually?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, like I made a career being tough on people who abuse children. I made it a career of people who victimize women, both in domestic violence as well as crimes of rape or incest. I mean, that is really kind of like my strongest profile in terms of being both a prosecutor and as a judge. I have no tolerance whatsoever for sexual abuse, whether it be grown women or minors. A sexual abuser belongs in prison, and as a judge, that's where I put them.